Hello and welcome to Dan Explains. I'm Dan. NASA has done some pretty amazing things over the decades. NASA was founded in 1958. Just 3 years later, in 1961, they put a man in space. And only 8 more years after that, they put a man on the moon. After that, progress slowed significantly, or some would even argue, NASA regressed. At least as of the making of this video, the Saturn V, which brought man to the moon, is still the most powerful rocket to ever fly, and it's been almost 50 years since the last time one flew. Even when NASA's next moon rocket, the SLS, does fly, hopefully next year, it still won't take that crown. So what happened? How come NASA sucks so much after being so successful? Let me explain why. NASA accomplished so much from the late 50s to the early 70s. I think just about everyone, including a lot of people at NASA, assumed that the trend would continue. They were even going to do a manned flyby Venus, and in the 80s, put a man on Mars. But it didn't happen. They did make some progress. They finished developing the shuttle, and they started and completed the International Space Station. Although it happened at a mollusk-esque speed, taking NASA 21 years from starting the station in 1998 to sending up the last US segment in 2019. That's with the potential retirement of the station in 2024. If that happens, it would have only been completed for 5 years before it's retired, at least on the US side anyway. The Russians just sent up another segment this year, finally. If you look at the graph of NASA's budget over the years, the orange line is inflation adjusted. You'd say, well, that's your issue, but it's not the whole story. Their budget has been a steady half or so of what it was during the Apollo era. So if that were the case, you'd think they'd be moving along at least half the speed, and that just hasn't been the case, especially since they already spent the money to design and build the Saturn V, which, by the way, was originally envisioned to bring people to Mars and not the moon. The Saturn V was capable enough to bring people to Mars without a ton more work. Also, look at SpaceX. They've inspired a lot of people with their fast-paced Apollo era-like rocket development speed. They're a private company, so they can keep their books closed. But Elon Musk has said the Starship program, which is a step up from the Apollo, is a $5 billion program, so money isn't the issue. There was, of course, the perception the United States had won the space race, which helped get the follow-on programs of Apollo canceled. The shuttle, of course, was supposed to make that a moot point by making access to space cheap, so you could just build whatever large ship you wanted without a huge giant rocket like the Saturn V. Their first objective was to build Space Station Freedom, later known as the International Space Station, and I already mentioned how that went. The shuttle, of course, ended up being much more difficult to refurbish than anyone anticipated. So instead of being able to bring things to space frequently, ended up only being able to fly a few times a year. So it seems like a series of unfortunate events that have been conspiring together to slow NASA down to the mollusk-esque pace we see today. But the devil is in the details here. Something people don't realize, especially if they don't live in the United States, is that NASA has been being used as a political tool pretty much since the beginning. Have you ever noticed how a lot of NASA's development facilities are on the Gulf Coast of the United States, in places like Alabama? You know, because it's close to Florida where it's ideal for launches, right? That way they can just throw their stuff on a boat. However, they could have just put these facilities in places like Virginia or the Carolinas, and they wouldn't have had to transport their parts all the way around the bottom of Florida. The reason was to bring more jobs to those states, to make the Kennedy and Johnson administrations look better because of the proposal and signing of the Civil Rights Act. That's all well and good, but it obviously didn't harm the Apollo program too much. However, people have to keep in mind, getting to the moon was NASA's singular goal at the time, and the agency was much leaner. After they had succeeded and landed a man on the moon, many Americans were asking themselves why we were wasting our money on NASA anymore. To protect their funding, NASA started to build their facilities in as many different places as possible. The reason is, if you were a congressman or a senator, you would be encouraged to vote for bills that increased or at least maintained NASA's funding. If you voted for the bills that reduced their funding, then people, aka voters, in your district would lose their jobs. Any political opponents would then be able to make a lot of hay out of you not looking out for your constituents, which is American speak for the people you represent in Congress or the Senate. This, of course, decreased efficiency and increased costs. Another issue is the way they primarily fund development, through government contracts. If you get given a certain amount of money to do something by the government, you're going to make sure every penny gets spent. In fact, you're going to want to run out of money and go over budget. So the next time you go begging to Congress again, you can say, "See, you didn't give us enough money in the last budget." After Apollo, it didn't take long for NASA's contractors to figure out NASA had a bunch of money to spend and not enough places to spend it. So, this attitude towards spending was extended to them. Every time they run behind schedule or over budget, they just go back to NASA and tell them they didn't have the needed funds, and NASA just gives them more money. Not only does this not encourage efficiency, it actually encourages waste. If you finish your project on budget and on time, they don't give you any more money. This has slowly, and at some points not so slowly, transformed NASA from the lean, fast-moving, well-oiled machine that it was in the 60s to the slow, rusty old behemoth it is today. There is some light at the end of the tunnel, however. If you grew up in the 80s and the 90s and loved space like I did, you probably overlooked all these inefficiencies and you wanted to see NASA get more funding so they could do the cool things like going to Mars. When President Bush Jr. announced the Constellation program, many of us thought NASA would finally be getting back on track instead of milling around wasting money in low Earth orbit, like they had been for the last 30 years. So, when Obama took over and killed the program, it was pretty disappointing. However, the silver lining was the continuation of the commercial cargo and the commercial crew programs. These programs were funded by awards rather than government contracts. Basically, there would be a fixed amount of money the company would get paid to provide a service rather than to develop a spacecraft. This incentivizes companies to save money rather than waste it. Ideally anyway, there still has been some financial shenanigans with NASA and old space cronies. Boeing's Starliner got extra money above and beyond their original award because they were threatening NASA that they were going to cancel it. Even after all that, the Starliner cost NASA $2 billion more than they paid for SpaceX's Dragon 2 spacecraft. And the Starliner isn't even flying yet. Well, the Dragon has been flying for over a year. However, it shouldn't take long for the people who pull the strings to realize you get more results with less money using the award system, rather than the fixed contract system of yesteryear. The change will be slow, so the facilities and employees that NASA has won't be losing their jobs anytime soon. In fact, many that are leaving now are getting jobs with companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin, which are expanding right now. Hopefully this means a bright future for both NASA, space exploration, and development. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please press the like button. Subscribe to my channel and ding the bell to get notified when I post new videos. Also, please support me on Patreon, link in the description. The more people support me, the more time I can dedicate to making videos like this one. So, until next time, have a great week.